In this video, I want to show you how to both draw and watercolor a snowman. So to begin with, we're going to draw directly on the watercolor paper. And I'm going to draw a little bit darker than I normally would, just so that you can see it. But we'll press and lift it before we start painting. So to begin with, we need to start with the very basic shapes that we see. We're going to start with circles here. And I'm just going to basically draw 3 circles. And you can see how lightly I'm sketching them. I'm just trying to get an idea of the placement of the snowman. So let's go ahead and change those 3 circles into a snowman. I'm just going to kind of imagine, almost like an ice cream cone where the ice cream kind of sits on top of the next scoop. I'm going to kind of imagine that's what the snow is doing. So as I go down, and it's just about ready to touch this other one, I'm going to kind of have it go up and down just a little bit and kind of hang over that scoop below, or that snowman ball below here. And we're going to just kind of give it a little bit of ups and downs. So you can see how it resembles an ice cream cone. Now when we get to the bottom here, instead of doing the same thing there, I'm going to actually put a little mound of snow that's coming up and connecting to that. And we're going to go out this way. So I'm starting to make it look a little more like a snowman. Now what we want to do is we want to put a hat on him. I'm going to put a beanie on him. So instead of going from here to here, I'm going to actually go out and then over and then out just a little bit. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want it to look like the hat is resting right on his head and not just in front of him. So we're going to kind of wrap it around, and we're going to put a big band on him. Just that beanie band there. And then we're going to just come up, and it's just like a half a circle, and we're going to just put a pom-pom on. So instead of a circle, I'm just drawing little tiny lines so it doesn't have the hard edges. Okay, so far it's we've got starting to look like a snowman. Now we need to start putting some details in it. Let's go ahead and put the eyes in. I like it when the eyes are kind of hiding from the rim of the hat. And I don't want the eyes to be just circles. I want it to look like I've put in a coal or a rock or something in the snow and pressed it in, so the snow's kind of coming up around it. So I'm going to just draw these random shapes that are not even, so I have little scoops around it. And I'm going to try to make them close to the same size. If they're not exactly the same size, that's great. It's totally fine, because the rocks you use aren't going to be anyway. And then for the nose, I want it to look like the carrot is coming from pushed into the snow as well. So I'm doing the same thing on one side, and then as I draw the carrot, just to make it more interesting, instead of making it stiff, I'm going to just kind of wiggle and give it a little bit more character, so that carrot has a little more interest there. And then we're going to do the same thing as we've done on the eyes, and we're going to do little tiny ones to form the mouth. All right, now I can see I've done the scoops here and here, but thinking about it, I think I'm going to cover up this because I want a scarf on it. So if you want a scarf, you'll be covering up a little bit as well. And we'll just erase any lines that we don't need when we're done. So I want to put some buttons on him, but I think I'll put the scarf on first. That way I'll know if it's covering anything up so I don't need to draw it. So we're going to scoop down like this. So if I'm putting a scarf on, if I went straight across, that would flatten the image. I want to curve down so it looks like it's wrapped around him. So I'm going to give myself a curve here, and I'm going to give myself another curve here. And I'm going to make it a little wider on this side, and I'm dipping it in just so it looks like it's curved around. And then on this side, I'm going to give it a little rounded square. And I'm going to press and erase just a little bit. I'm going to erase just a little bit here so you can tell what's going on. Okay, and then I want the scarf to kind of look like it's kind of blowing in the wind maybe. And I'm going to have it cover the edge of that snowman's body here, so we're going to get rid of that as well. and we can put little tassels on it when we paint or whatnot. I want there to be a little bit of a line here. And as I look at it, I can make any adjustments that I need or I want to. I want to put a stick coming out here for his arm. So I'm just gonna put a little branch there. And I want it to come from behind a little bit. So I'm going to put it behind the edge there. And then on this side, I think I will have, you'll be able to see this little part of it, and then I'm going to have it go behind the scarf and come up here. So, and the branches are definitely not going to be even. One's probably going to be shorter or thicker than the other. That's great. And then let's go ahead and put some buttons on. Same thing as I did on the eyes. And we've got our snowman drawn. So what we want to do now is we want to erase any lines that we don't need, and then we want to lighten our lines too. So I'm going to just, using a kneaded eraser, I'm going to just press and lift to begin with. Okay. So instead of rubbing back and forth, I'm just lifting some of the lead so it's not quite so dark. So I'll try not to lift too much out so you can still see the lines. I'm going to rub a little bit and get rid of a couple of the lines that I no longer need. All right, now I'm going to just put a few little lines here just to remind myself that we want some texture on the band. And we're going to get started painting. So what we want to do before we start any painting is we want to get our watercolors nice and juicy. So I'm just going to use a spray bottle, and I'm going to spray all my paints, whether I'm going to use them or not. They'll dry. It doesn't do anything to them, so I'm going to let them all get sprayed at the same time. And we're going to start with the lightest value. So the snow is going to be the lightest value in this picture. So with the snow, it actually has white always has color in it. So anything that you're going to paint usually if it's white, it usually has some reflective color in it. So the sky or the branches or the color of the scarf or anything, any of those colors could be reflective in the snow. So what we're going to do is we're going to get our snowman wet. So every place where there's snow, we're going to do wet on wet. So you're going to just use plain water, and we're going to go down and we're going to just get that wet. And I'm going to go right over the top of those rocks. And the reason I'm doing that is because they're going to be darker, and so it won't matter if there's a lighter color below them. So you can see I'm quickly just getting this entire area wet. I'm just doing the snowman. I'll do the ground afterwards. So we're just going to do the snowman first. Anything that's snow is what we're doing right now. I'm going to go right over the top of the mouth and the eyes, but I'm going to go around the nose, just because it's going to be a little bit lighter of a value, just to make sure I don't change the color on the nose. Okay, now that it's wet, let's go ahead and get some color in. I'm going to add a little bit of color on my palette. I want to get some purples and some blues. I can put a little bit of the Naples yellow in. I can mix some colors. I can get some gray tones. What I want to do now is I want to start dropping in some colors. So you can see I didn't get right there. Okay, so we're going to just start dropping in. I'm going to imagine that the light is shining from this side. So this side's going to be a little bit darker. So I'm going to just start dropping in a little color, and I don't want it to get too dark. But it does dry a little bit lighter. So we're going to drop in, and now I'm picking up a little purple, and I'm just going to try to vary it a little bit, just to give it some interest. And the reason I did it wet on wet is because I don't want there to be any hard edges. And by doing it wet on wet, I can just drop it in, and the water does all the magic and does all the blending for me. So, okay, I'm going to rinse my brush off really good. And because this side is the light side, I'm going to grab a little bit of this Naples yellow, and I'm going to drop in just a little bit. Looks a little bit too yellow right now, but we're going to add stuff to it. So we're going to drop in a little bit of that, rinse our brush off, and then we'll go back to dropping in. You can see I'm just dropping, I'm not mixing. If I mix a little blue with my yellow, I'm going to end up with a green snowman, and I don't want that to happen. Okay, so I'm going to let that be for just a minute, and then I'm going to go down and I'm going to get the ground as well. So I'm going to leave a little tiny white band so it doesn't touch that snowman there. So there's a little bit of a space between the ground and the snowman, just so I can paint them both without drying it. We'll come back and touch it up just a little bit, but we're going to stop it at this point, and we're going to blow dry it, and then we'll get back to it. You can see how when it dries, the colors kind of soften and blend together. Now what we're going to do is we're going to do the sky. And I'm going to use a bigger brush, and instead of wet on wet, I'm going to do wet on dry. I'm just going to try to work quickly and with really juicy paints. So I'll grab some water on my brush, and I'm going to grab a little bit of a teal and a cerulean, a little bit of a cobalt, just try to make a nice blue color. I'm going to make another one that's a little more turquoisey, so we have just a variation of color here. Grab a little green in there if I wanted to turquoise it up a little bit. There we go. Okay, this time we're going to work wet on dry, but we have to cut in around it. So using a big brush, I'm going to start with my teal color, and I'm going to try to quickly cut in around my snowman. And you can see how much water I have in my paint. I'm not worrying about my branch. I'm just going to go right over the branch. But the reason I'm doing it dry is I want to just change the effect a little bit. So I'm putting some down, cutting it around the object, and then I'm trying to disperse my color so it just kind of softly fades away. And I'm leaving some little white specks just to kind of give it the appearance of maybe snow or just a different texture. And I'm going to work my way around. To make it easier, I'm going to turn it upside down, and I'm going to quickly go around this. And as I go around, you can see that I'm trying to be careful, but I'm not so focused on it that it's taking me forever to get around it. Because those are a little bit darker values, so if I have to go over the top of it, if I happen to touch it, I can cover it up. It's not a big deal. Okay, now that I get to this point, I'm about even with this side, so I'm going to come back over here, turn it right side up, and we're going to make our way around here. And I'm going to start changing my color just a little bit. I'm trying to keep the edges wet, so I'm going to bounce back and forth a little bit. And you can see I'm actually grabbing some color with both of them in it now. I want it to be a little bit darker towards the bottom. So right at the bottom of the snowman, I'm making my blue just a little bit darker. Just to give it that contrast and to be able to see where the ground is as well. Okay, so while that's drying, let's go ahead and we don't want to touch anything that's wet, so let's go ahead and work on the nose of the snowman. So on the nose of the snowman, we're going to do two different things. We're going to first put a little color in of a lighter value. So I'm going to use the New Gamboge, just a little bit of a lighter yellow-orange. And we're going to block that in first. And then while it's wet, we're going to just grab the orange as well, and we're going to just put a little bit of orange on it. And you can see I just tipped my paper just a little bit. So I'm putting the orange on it. I'm going to rinse my brush off and dry it, and then I'm going to use just a clean, dry brush to soften that. So you hardly see any of that lighter color, but it is peeking through just a little bit. Okay, let's go ahead and blow dry it now, and then we'll get the hat and the scarf done. Okay, let's go ahead and go to the hat. I'm going to grab a middle-sized brush. I'm using a number 8 now. We're going to go to the hat, and I think we'll do the hat green. And I'm using a lighter green, and basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to block in the top portion. So, just blocking it in. And as it hits where the pom-pom is, I'm going to just kind of flick and do little tapered lines into it. And you can see I'm leaving a little bit of white showing through, which I like to do as well. And I'm going to grab a little bit of the sap green, and I'm going to drop it in on the sides while it's wet to give it some depth. I'm going to make it a little bit darker on the right, or on this side here. I'm going to make it a little darker because that's the shadow side. We're going to give that just a minute to dry, and then let's go ahead and go down to the scarf. On the scarf, I think I'm trying to see what color would be best to do. Let's go ahead and let's do a green as well, but this time we'll do more of a dark green. And if you want to, you can put stripes on it. In fact, I think that's what I'll do. I'm going to rinse my brush out, and because I'm putting stripes on it, I'm just going to grab a little bit of a gray color. You can mix a gray, or you can grab like a neutral tint, and I'm going to give it some movement using my gray. So you can see I'm just adding a little bit of gray to it, because I'm going to do a stripe, and every other stripe is going to be white. So I just want there to be a little bit of turning of the form before I even start putting the stripes in. So we'll let that dry for just a minute, and let's go back to the pom-pom, the top. We're going to go back and we're going to get the band in. And I'm just going to leave a little bit of white showing between the band and the top of the hat, just to separate it a little bit. And I like the white of the paper showing through there, so I'm not going to put too much on. I'm going to put a little bit of a shadow shape here on this side, because that's a shadow edge. And then I'm going to take a little bit of that darker color, and I'm using kind of like a toothpaste texture, and I'm going to put in a little bit of the dark right here under the hat, just to send it down and around. Try not to touch the other area. Just going to put a little bit right there to send it down and around. Let's go ahead and grab a small brush, and we're going to grab some of the green. I'm using the lighter green, kind of the toothpaste texture, and we're going to put some little lines for the pom-pom on there. So you can see I'm using the light green. And I'm trying not to put too many. I want it to appear that it has some whiteness to it. And then I'm going to go dip into the sap green as I get to the shadow side. And so it's going to change ever so slightly. Almost looks black, but it is that sap green. And then while it's wet, I'm going to rinse my brush out. So it's just slightly damp, and I'm going to just softly dab it just to soften those lines. I like the lines, but I didn't want them to be too harsh. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's grab a brown and let's put our branch in, and then we'll come back and finish off our scarf. For the branch, I'm actually going to use a little bit of brown, and I mix it with some of this yellow I have on my palette already, just to make a lighter brown, and we're going to put that in. So we've got a little bit of the lighter brown in there. And we're going to do both sides real quickly. I'm going to turn it just a little bit. Then I'm going to grab some of the brown straight from my palette. And I'm going to add a little bit of a darker edge to it just to give it some dimension. And I think I want it a little bit wider as it goes into the snowman, so I'm just adding a little depth or a little width there. And we'll do that to the other side as well. Okay, let's go ahead and rinse our brush off. And I think our gray on the scarf is dry, so let's put the stripes on the scarf. And what we're going to do is we are going to curve the stripes with the way the fabric is curving up and down. If we don't do that, we'll flatten it out and it will not look like it's really a scarf made out of fabric. So can you see the outside edge here, the contour of the scarf? We're going to actually follow that contour. So let's start with the outside shape, just like that. And as it changes, then we'll change our stripe. So I'm leaving a space, and then I'm just going to put another stripe in. And I'm putting some stripes in, and you can see it's going to change because of the creases in the fabric. So as we get here, we're going to give it a couple, 3 little scoops because it's kind of being folded in. And it kind of offsets it. So I'm just trying to imagine what the fabric does. And if you can't imagine it, grab a scarf and wrap it around something and then draw what you actually see. And on this side, we want the contour as well. I'm actually going to grab some of the sap green since it's the darker side, and we're going to add that to it as well. Now this is the knot, so this knot is going to be going the other direction. So let's go ahead and rinse the darker green out, and we're going to come down and we're going to turn directions. So now we're going to curve this way. I'm going to imagine it kind of curving like this. And then the ends of the scarf are got some curves on them as well. So just following what we think the fabric is doing. And we don't have to, we can kind of just allude to the fact of what they're doing. We don't have to draw every little detail. And we're going to put in some tassels. So I'm just kind of flicking my wrist and kind of putting in some tapered lines there. Okay, let's go ahead and get the eyes in. Now with the eyes, I'm going to just use neutral tint, straight black, and then I'm going to add a little bit of purple because it will give it some depth. instead of just black, we want it to be, so if you have a neutral tint, a black, whatever, mix something with it, purple, a red, a blue. That will just make it more interesting. One thing we need to keep in mind when we do the eyes is we want there to be a highlight or a little reflection. That makes it look like there's someone home. So we want it to look like we have a little sparkle in the eyes. So I'm going to just put a little box around it just so I don't lose my highlighted areas. And I'm just going to paint around that box. And if it's bumpy, it's great because that's what it does when you put the rock in the snowman. So we're going to do both of those. And then on the little rocks, if you want to, you can put a reflection in it, or you're just going to fill them in. So I'm going to just fill mine in. And you can see I'm not being precise at all. I'm just dabbing at it. And I want it to be kind of loose and I think that works great. For these rocks, I can put a little highlight in them. I don't know about you, but I can see a little purple shining through, and I like that look. And as you go, you can make adjustments however you need. I just finished the rocks here, and now I'm looking at it and I'm thinking that I'm missing just a little bit of depth between the two sections of the snowman. So I'm going to grab my bigger brush and a little bit of this blue, grab a little bit of that gray as well, and I'm going to put a little shadow shape underneath the edge there. That's a little too bright, so I'm going to go a little duller. I want it to look like there's a little depth between there, so I'm going to be careful not to touch that button that's still wet. I'm going to actually just put a little shadow shape, and I'm just going to carry it down here. Okay, so I have a little shadow shape here. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing right under the edge of the scarf here, just to give it some depth. And you can see how I kind of curved that, and I left some hard lines, hard edges, and I like that look because it's such a light value. I like the little edge that I created there, so I'm going to leave that there. And then I'm going to go, and I'm working my way up to the face. I'm going to do the same thing along this edge, being careful not to touch his eye because it's still wet. Just putting a little shape there. And then we're going to go down, and in the snow at the bottom, because we're working dry now, we can actually just give it a little bit more texture. I don't want it to look like the sky, so I'm putting a little bit of gray in there. So there you have it. We've got our snowman. Let me go ahead and blow dry it, and I'll show you one more thing you can do if you would like. Okay, if you would like, you can actually add a little bit more accent to it, a little detail to it by using a pen. I'm using an Onyx Uniball pen, and you don't have to. I like the way it is here, but if you wanted to, you can add just a little bit of dimension. So I'm going to outline just a little bit, not a lot. Just kind of, you can kind of choose where you want it to be. But I like just kind of that sketchy look. I'm not being precise at all, and I'm not doing every line, but I'm just giving myself a few guidelines or a few lines that just add the detail without outlining the whole thing. So adding a little bit here, you can see I did just a little tiny bit. And I'm going to add a little bit on the band just for texture as well, but I'm not being precise. You can see how I'm just being very light and putting it in, and just kind of fades away. So anywhere you feel like it needs a little depth, I think I want a little depth here that I didn't get in, so I put a little, use a little ink there. So there you have it, the snowman. Simple to draw, just start with the very basic shapes and then you start building on that. So there you have it. We just finished our snowman. We started with the very basic shapes, round circles, and we built upon it. As I drew it, I tried to remember that I'm drawing something round, so I didn't draw anything that's straight and flat because I didn't want it to flatten the image. So all my lines have a little bit of an arch or a curve to it, and then you can leave little whites, you can add depth and dimension with ink, and you can use a combination of different colors to add shadow shapes and make it more interesting. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like or subscribe below and let me know what else you'd like to learn. Thanks. See you later.